World Flipper is a pinball gacha game. Trust me, you've never played a gacha like this before, and you never will, because this game has been terminated worldwide as of July 25th, 4 AM Universal Time. This will be the third video in the series I like to call End of Service, where I upload a short review of a game at the exact time that it shuts down and answer the question, was it any good? Unlike the previous two entries, I actually kinda feel bad for this game as I feel it was one of the better ones. My name is Psyche, and let's look into World Flipper. World Flipper is developed by a Japanese studio called Citail, who only has World Flipper and another game called Jumping Rabbit, which also has been terminated. The game is published by Cygames, the same creators behind big titles such as Dragalia Lost, Princess Connect, and Uma Musume. The reputation of the company can be quite varied, but there's no doubt that they are one of the more influential gacha developers out there. The global ports of the game is handled by Kakao Games, which is a South Korean company. The lifespan of World Flipper ran from November 2019 to earlier this year, February, which is just a bit over 4 years. Not too bad for an indie gacha game. I say this because the Japanese servers has already been shut down. The global version, since it released in 2021 instead, had a bit more lifeline and was announced for end of service this year in July, like right now actually. In case you're wondering why the screen is in portrait mode, this is because the game literally has no support for landscape display, as it was exclusively made for mobile screens. So yeah, it's gonna have to be like this for the rest of the video. In World Flipper, the story follows a young Elk and Stella, alongside Light, a hero from another world that was turned into a marketable plushie by the Shadow Lord or something. Anyways, having lost most of his powers, Light is teleported to Starview Village, the same planet that Elk and Stella reside on, and go on a journey across the different worlds to return Light back to its original planet. I'm not gonna lie, the premise of the story takes a lot of story cliches, like starting off in a grassy forest defeating slimes as the first enemy and so on. I was only able to get through a couple of the early chapters, but to my understanding, the story is pretty decent with many flavorful characters introduced every arc. Before its time was up, the main story actually concluded, with all chapters available for viewing 2 months before termination. I looked at a little bit of the graduation event, which is the very last event before the game shuts down, and I gotta say, even though I've never seen the majority of the story, seeing all the characters bid farewell to each other just seemed surreal to me. Since as of this moment in time, it's not possible for any new player to see any of this again. It's not like the ending of a long-running show or anime, since you can just rewatch it. This here, though, hits pretty different. The story is partially voice acted in Japanese, with characters saying generic lines like yes or no, while the text is more descriptive. The story is delivered in a visual novel format with 2D pixel sprites. The advantage with this approach is that 3D graphics generally may not age too well over time, but pixel art is timeless. I really don't have any complaints with this method of presentation, except that I found that this game has an abnormally large amount of loading screens. Like, it has to load whenever you try to level up a character or see a side story. And that's kind of my main complaint when I tried it out. The gameplay of World Flipper is deceptively simple. You tap anywhere on the screen to activate both the flipper pads. Whenever a white arrow shows up, you can tap the screen again to make the party shoot towards the direction of the arrow. You can swipe the screen to the left, upwards, or right to activate each character's skill. They can be more effective depending on the positioning on the board. This mechanic actually took quite a while for me to get used to, as you have to position yourself and time the skill at the same time to gain its full effects. If the party comes in contact with multiple enemies, then the flippers will change its colors and it will activate a power flip on your next play, where your team will launch a special attack. If you land in the gutters, then everyone will simply just take some damage. Surprisingly, even if a character dies, they will leave behind a coffin on the field. If you come in contact with it for the specified amount of times, they are revived, though the timer increases every time this happens. That's kind of it, really. It's mainly the concept of a pinball gacha game that I was fascinated by. There is an element system where one element will deal 1.5 times damage to another, but there is no element disadvantage. So at worst, you're dealing neutral damage. A party consists of 3 members, while each can be equipped with a secondary character, so you can technically have up to 6. Though only the 3 primary ones will show up during a level. There are also armaments, which are just weapons, though a quirk with this game is that you can't actually level them up, only limit break them via dupes or other means. Characters though you can level. There's no ascension mechanic, but upon reaching the level cap, you can break the cap with duplicates of that character. You can also level the skills of them through these monument nodes, with these skills separated into multiple classes, such as buffs or supports. Character rarity ranges from 3 to 5 stars, though the lower rarities do exist, you just can't get them in the normal gacha banners. Now, the rates, at least when I tried them, seem to be modified as the game was ending service, but according to this Reddit comment at launch, the rate of drawing a 5-star character is 5%, which is admittedly on the higher end. One pull on the slot machine takes 150 units of beads, so a multi is 1500. This is also fine, as 150 is a fairly even number and is easier than some other gachas to calculate. The pity, at least from what I could gather, is at 250, and it is split across banners. Whenever you roll on the gacha, there is an animation of these presumably gachapon capsules falling down on something resembling a pachinko machine. And if one comes in contact with a gold or rainbow block, then you know that you just got a 4 or 5 star respectively. Something genius and frankly quite evil thing that it does is that it's possible for the ball to miss the gold blocks. So a fake out can happen where the ball weaves through all the shiny blocks, it just gives you a 3 star in the end. There is a way to skip this animation in case you don't want to be more disappointed than you already are. The armament gacha also exists, but the cost of beads per pull is reduced. Not to mention the gacha animation is actually different from the characters. In regards to monetization, I can't see any of it as the cash shop has been disabled. In fact, when both the JP and the global service announced the game's closure, both were notified 2 months before the game's termination, and the in-app purchases were disabled immediately after. A long notice and disabling the microtransactions? Now that's how you handle it. It makes absolutely no sense to still let players pay money for something that just can't be used anymore. Although the menu for one of the starter bundles is still present to be sold for 1500 paid beads. Since I know you can't get paid beads anymore, this just caused a little bit of confusion. This game also uses the stamina system for pretty much anything, though most of the activities will have its stamina costs drastically reduced, and they were handing out stamina potions like free candy. In the Events tab is where you go to see all the daily farming nodes, boss raids, or other time-limited events. The menu here has everything other than the main story packaged into one, which is a breath of fresh air after playing gacha games with very cluttered UI. Now, I enjoy the pixel graphics and the unique gameplay design, but something a live service game has to pay attention to is how wide the base gameplay concept can expand. A common complaint is that once you get used to how the game works, then you might as well just turn on the autoplay feature and play it like an AFK game. Yes, autoplay exists, but there is no sweep function, so the game will play itself for you to farm those daily materials. To my surprise, the autoplay AI is actually pretty decent at timing the flips and skills, while letting you place the game on 2x speed as well. It's to the point that in the late game, it's more about forming the right teams and weapons, and just let the bot auto-battle everything for you. The unique and simplistic gameplay is both World Flipper's strong and weak point. I'm sure an audience for these AFK games do exist, but looking at the common sentiments online, part of the reason why some players stopped is because too much of the late game didn't require much manual controls at all, and the majority of content other than challenges could be cleared with the autoplay AI. When there isn't enough variation for a game intended to be played indefinitely, one has to wonder, would this game have worked better as a single-player experience? Now let's go over how the developers handled the end of service, as I also think there are ways to do it well or not so well. The first is if they had any intentions of preserving the game via an offline mode. Well, the answer is a bit mixed. When Cygames announced the end of service for the Japanese version, it was stated that the app was still going to be downloadable, and that the Flipperpedia, I'm not sure what it entails, is still accessible, so at least some degree of preservation was attempted. However, the same can't be said for the global version. Since the port is handled by Cao Games, how they addressed it was a bit different. In the notice here, while a lot of the events were brought to global to make up for the missing time, it reads that the app can no longer be downloaded. So since I don't explicitly see that there is an offline mode, I can only assume that one was not planned for the global version. A couple days after the termination, the official Japanese Twitter page even teased something that may come after World Flipper. This was posted 4 months ago, so who knows? Maybe this game will come back in the future after all. The closure of World Flipper, at least in my opinion, is handled better than some other gachas that shut down. It's one that I feel pretty bad for, since the music is quite catchy and the general concept of the gameplay feels so fresh. I'm sure there will be many cases of games like this shutting down and people just wondering, this game did not have to be a gacha. But anyways, that is the definitive end of World Flipper. I want to use this last section talking about the handlers of the game. Cygames as a publisher has a long history of creating gacha games, and dare I say, they are one of the more competent Japanese developers in this regard. I'm currently waiting on Uma Musume Global so I can make a review on that as well. Something they at least try to do is to preserve the games that have been terminated with an offline mode, where some of the content is still accessible. And not only that, the company site even lists the past terminated games on their lists, as if to say, hey, these projects may have been shut down, but we're proud of making them. I think Cygames has good integrity in this regard, where despite their shortcomings in game design sometimes, they do post all of their past works on the website. But the same cannot be said about the gacha devs in the next video. In the world of gacha games, people tend to only focus on the big titles in the industry. In reality, one of these smaller hidden games go end of service almost every other week. With these bigger games taking the spotlight, it's hard to imagine that a decade ago, gacha games started out as these unknown mobile games with very simple controls and complexity. The thing about these older games, since they never had the foresight and the tools to modernize themselves, seeing one last for 4 to 5 years is already pretty impressive. World Flipper is just one of many small fish in that pond, but this one caught my eye, and after seeing its unique spin, I just had to try it out. In a way, these games almost become lost media, since unlike an undiscovered console game that anyone can find dusting on the shelves in a pawn shop, if a live service game terminates its services, that's it. No more game. I want to at least keep track of the ones I'm interested in to make a video, as I'm sure a lot of other people would appreciate finding some of these diamonds in the rough. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the third video in the series I call End of Service. I'm curious to hear if anyone has played World Flipper before and what you thought of it. And, as always, thanks for watching, and have fun out there.